One of the central themes in George Orwell's 1984 is that most of the people in the society don't have any idea they're living in a despotic, autocratic regime. There are a few dissident freethinkers who realize the truth, but they're far outnumbered by the average people on the street who view Big Brother not as the embodiment of a tyrannical regime, but rather as a benevolent guardian, a well-intentioned protector that keeps them safe from unwanted words and thoughts and people. And stop me if any of this starts sounding eerily familiar at any point. The regime that Orwell depicts in the novel, which came out 4 years after the end of the Second World War, its triumph had been in perfecting the propagandistic principles that Joseph Goebbels and the National Socialists originated and first put into practice in the years 1933 to 45, and above all others, the principle that if you succeed in capturing and co-opting all of the mass media, not only can you make people believe things that aren't true, but you can convince them that slavery and oppression are really freedom and virtue. Now, we use the word Orwellian a hell of a lot these days, though rarely without good cause, I would submit, but in my whole lifetime, I don't think I've seen a thing as quintessentially Orwellian as the reaction we saw over the weekend from America's woke corporations to last Friday's overturning of Roe v. Wade. I hadn't even made my coffee yet on Saturday morning before the CEOs of every big company from sea to shining sea began falling all over themselves trying to be the first one to announce that we're going to pay our employees to go out of state for an abortion if they require one, and then they would vomit out the standard pro-abortion platitudes about bodily autonomy and reproductive freedom and all that bullshit. And leftist women of childbearing age, well, they seem to have bought it hook, line, and sinker, every last word of it. Slavery and oppression successfully passing for freedom and virtue. Now, our friends on the left have never been accused of being unduly preoccupied by the potential unintended consequences of their favorite policies. They sort of just prefer to do things and then fail as they go, but this one is a real humdinger in that category. What's that you say, Mr. CEO of the company where I work? Did I just hear you say you will send me and a companion of my choice on a free vacation as long as I get an abortion while I'm there? So you'll give me an extra week of vacation and you'll pay me and the other person $4,000 apiece, cash money, in addition to providing the 2 round-trip plane tickets. Do I have that right? Now, do you remember a while back when the Alito draft opinion first leaked, and I joked that California was going to start a chain of abortion tourism resorts called Gavin's by the Sea? I guess I was really only half joking at best, but I didn't expect it to happen quite so soon, and with every Fortune 500 company getting in on the act to boot. But I'm just going to come out and ask the question. Does anyone really think that there are no female employees in the country who are unscrupulous enough to get knocked up just in order to cash in one of the free abortion vacations? I think it'll be funny when the companies start getting massive numbers of transfer requests from women employees wanting to relocate to states that have abortion bans. So you've lived in Oregon your whole life, it says here, but you're requesting transfer to our Alabama office. That's right, sir. I've discovered a sudden affinity for the former Confederacy, so much that I think I might like to get impregnated by one of Jeb Stuart's descendants. That's understandable, right? In fact, I am so certain this policy will be cynically abused for free vacations. I will bet every piece of property I own that within 12 months' time, each company that makes this offer, or some version of it, will wind up either rescinding the policy or instituting a limit of 1 abortion vacation per calendar year. Maybe they'll start seeing the writing on the wall when Trixie from accounting takes her 7th abortion holiday. But on the other side of the open, I want to talk about why this purported freedom that so many women are foolishly applauding today is really a hell of a lot closer to servitude. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where it's all fun and games until an irreplaceable national treasure like Billy Joe from Green Day decides to throw in with the monarchists. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. So yeah, Billy Joe from Green Day. He's mad as hell and he's not going to take it anymore. So he blurted out to a London crowd during a concert there this past weekend that He is such a big fan of team abortion that he's going to renounce his U.S. citizenship and apparently become a British subject. And look, best of luck to you, Billy Joe. I'm as eager to get rid of your dopey little ass as anybody is, and I even hate your fucking music. But I think you need to be prepared for disappointment here, because I'm pretty sure the UK isn't accepting white immigrants at the moment, unless they speak perfect Ukrainian. So I guess there's your homework, son. Let's see how committed you are. And I would be remiss if I didn't remark on this other little thing. It strikes me as ironic, or either that or evidence of a grotesquely diseased mind, that a U.S. citizen would become sufficiently disillusioned by the outcome of our democratic process that he would opt instead to swear his fealty to Her Britannic Majesty Elizabeth II by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and her other realms and territories, Queen, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith. I'm just saying, I never really had this guy pegged for a monarchist, that's all, but if this is what butters his baguette, who am I to judge? Free country and all that, right? Some people might even say it's fairly bizarre, even rather sick, to renounce one's nationality over not enough abortions, and in doing so, to pretend this act places you firmly on the moral high ground above your wretched, benighted former countrymen. The Prime Minister of Canada, Al Jolson Jr., he's another guy who fancies himself to be sitting nice and pretty up on top of that moral high ground. He says he is horrified and deeply offended to hear that Roe v. Wade has been set aside. To reiterate, the leader of a country where you can demand an abortion at any moment up until full live-term birth, and the doctor will go to prison if he declines to comply, that guy, that smarmy, greasy, sleazy, blackface-wearing, cultural appropriating sack of caribou shit, he thinks he's better than you, because our high court returned a matter of sovereignty to the states that was never its own to rightfully usurp in the first place. He thinks he's a champion of women's rights and reproductive freedom, just like those woke corporate CEOs who are competing with one another to see who can offer the most lavish abortion vacation package. First things first, let's call things what they are. If your employer is offering you a free vacation in exchange for liquidating your unborn child, you shouldn't be slapping him on the back and thanking him for his wonderful generosity. You should be slapping him on his face for being an awful evil bastard. But he's not the first awful evil bastard who tried to dissuade you from becoming a mother. Not by a long shot. For as long as you can remember, in every government school you ever went to, they drilled it into your head that in order to be successful in life, well, you have to go to university after high school, and you must, at a minimum, complete a bachelor's degree. So, because you're a dutiful young woman who wants to follow the rules and do what's expected of her, you went and you took out a couple $100,000 in student loans underwritten by the federal government that you can never discharge in a bankruptcy, thus establishing for many years, possibly forever, a transactional relationship, debtor to debt holder, between you and the central government. So then you spent the rest of your prime childbearing years working in the cubicle farm down at the widget factory. It's not like you can think about starting a family until you pay down those damn student loans. But I'm a liberated woman, you said. I can have random, meaningless sex with anybody I want on the weekend, and I never have to face any of the potential consequences that my female ancestors did. Those poor, miserable, oppressed women who spent their prime childbearing years bearing children, raising their families, doing the two most important jobs that will ever exist in human civilization, mother and wife. Those poor non-liberated souls who only ever had physical relations with one man and never had cause to regret it. How ignorant they were of the joys of a life spent sitting in a cubicle during the week and feeding one's most base, most hedonistic impulses on the weekends. Boy, I sure do have it better than them being a modern, independent woman of the 21st century. But the central premise of feminism, it has to be said, wound up being a lie. And that's not an opinion, it's a verifiable fact that is supported by reams of empirical evidence. American women are markedly more unhappy today than they have been at any point since people started doing surveys on such things. But if the promises of the feminist movement and the pro-choice movement If those promises held true, then shouldn't the surveys say that women today are happier than they have ever been, rather than saying the opposite? If we were going to impute bad intentions to the abortion industry and to the third wave feminists, which I am fully prepared to do both, we might reasonably surmise that they discouraged 2 generations of young women to waste their lives on empty, meaningless nonsense, because the empty, meaningless nonsense, when you dress it all up pretty and nice to look like progress and liberation, made it easier to exert control and to take what they wanted from you. Has any industry in this country gained more wealth in this century than the colleges and universities have? The answer to that question is no. And do you suppose that would still be true without 30 years now of foisting predatory student loans on young women and trying to scare them off of marriage and motherhood? Nope. It sure as hell would not be. So here's the bottom line. That thing you thought was female empowerment and women's liberation, doesn't it look a whole lot like just servitude by other means? In a country with a long and proud tradition of people selling snake oil, we still sell plenty of it right up to the present day, and there is never a shortage of customers, or so it seems. It was also with some interest that I read today how a bunch of rabidly pro-abortion leftist women have decided that the best way to address the monstrosity of a world without Roe v. Wade is to band together and resolve not to engage in fleshy Congress with any male human until... I'm not sure when. I don't know what the limiting factor is, actually. If they're planning on waiting until there's a liberal majority on the Supreme Court that somehow waves a wand and unoverturns Roe, that could be one hell of a long sex strike. Might as well get it over with and go join the nunnery. But then again, if you've seen the looks of the average woman who participates in pro-abortion activism, I'm going to go out on a limb and say a sex strike isn't going to make her life look all that much different. It's rather like an unemployed guy joining a picket line during a labor stoppage. Like, what are you even doing? But let's keep focusing on those women for a moment, even though we all would prefer to turn away, frankly. Those women who are shrieking nonsense sounds at the heavens over the federal government no longer guaranteeing the right to an abortion, do those women seem happy to you? Do they seem like people who are leading meaningful, fulfilling lives? When the thing that animates your passions, the thing that motivates your feet to hit the floor each morning, when that thing is celebrating the moral virtue of abortion, I don't think it's possible that you're leading a happy life. I think that's a recipe for personal misery and desolation if I have ever heard one. And another thing, if you think Planned Parenthood is a force for good in the world, you are not paying attention. And it would behoove you to start, lest you continue carrying water for white supremacist eugenicists. White supremacist kind of sounds like a cool band name. Now, when women sing the praises of Planned Parenthood, I sort of get the same sensation I get when a black person calls themselves a Marxist. Like, God, if you just spent 5 minutes reading the source texts, you would recoil in horror and you would never call yourself that thing again. Which is to say, in the worst case scenario, if you're a black woman who self-identifies as a Marxist and you donate to Planned Parenthood, you are throwing in with multiple white supremacists. Marx, as everyone seems to know except the Marxists, he thought Africans were a subhuman race best suited to servitude, and he was not at all bashful about saying so. And when Margaret Sanger started Planned Parenthood, she made damn sure to locate in as many non-white areas as possible, because the whole purpose of her life's work, as she saw it, was to see that as many non-white children as possible got aborted. Neither Marx nor Sanger was any fan of ethnic diversity, nor pluralistic societies in general. For both of them, the ideal society they envisaged was one with only people of European extraction in it. Margaret Sanger would be crestfallen to see the current demographic makeup of the United States. She would say that her life's work had come to nothing. And I suppose you could try to offer her reassurance by saying, "Come on, Maggie, we did do 63 million abortions because of you. That's got to count for something, right?" But then she probably would just complain that you didn't abort enough of the right ones. Then you could try again to raise her spirits by pointing out that Planned Parenthood locations are still wildly oversaturated in black and Latino neighborhoods. Maybe that would drag a tiny smile out of her at least before she has to leave and go back to hell. But one could argue, and convincingly, in my view, that today's Democrats are engaged in a campaign of something that could fairly be described as eugenics. And industrialized abortion is part of the equation, along with things like making sure young people get saddled with sufficient debt so that home ownership remains out of reach, so they're less likely to settle down and marry and raise families. And I guess I need to throw out this disclaimer before continuing. So, when people like us talk about this stuff, I mean, namely the demographic policies that the Democrats have been openly pursuing quite proudly for 50 years, the woke idiots all clutch their pearls about great replacement theory, this and that. They call us conspiracy theorists. They say that we're trafficking in disinformation. But you know what? Fuck them. Democrats have been very desirous for a long time that our population growth be driven primarily or exclusively by immigration. And corporate America has never had much trouble getting on board with that program because corporate America likes labor that works cheap and doesn't cause trouble. Last year, when the news came out that for the first time, non-white births had outpaced white births, every dumb cocksucker in the fake news media celebrated like they had just won the lottery. Like the moral condition of our nation had been automatically and materially advanced by the arrival of this very welcome news. But if you asked one of those people to explain themselves, if you said, why is that so obviously a good thing? A racial preference is necessarily a racial prejudice, and how can any form of racial prejudice be morally righteous? What would they say? What could they say? Myself, I can conceive of no explanation that would not predicate itself on some sort of implicit appeal to racism. But I thought we were a country that rejects racism. And I thought we were a country that rejects eugenics as well. But today the progressive left is pursuing a program that is drenched and dripping in both. Democrats think their best chance at gaining power and holding it permanently is by forcibly remaking the demographics of the country. And the scam of mandatory college, the predatory loans, the celebration of sexual profligacy, the constant promotion of transgenderism, the repackaging of abortion as a rite of passage or a fun leisure activity, the denigration of manhood and masculinity, all of those are ingredients in the larger cocktail, along with a healthy dose of wide-open borders, and when you pour it all into the glass, it looks like the Democrat Shangri-La utopia. You got a small, white, super wealthy aristocracy and a huge immigrant minority servant class that will always vote Democrat, because duh, don't forget who left the back gate open for you. And I bet Joe Biden sure is puzzled to see his approval rating with Latinos cratering into the low 20s, since for years the whole Democrat program has relied on the notion that if we allow lots of illegal immigration, that means the Latinxes will love us forever, right? And it's going to be likely the miscalculation that brings them all down, that sinks this whole project they've been working on so diligently since Ted Kennedy launched it half a century ago. And it couldn't happen to a nicer group of loathsome paternalist scumbag assholes, if you ask me. And that's where we'll adjourn for the night, I think. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Have a pleasant tomorrow. See you Wednesday. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.